Yeah. He's a former assistant United States attorney and current property rights attorney. For the past 20 years, Fred Kelly Grant has fought for the rights of farmers, ranchers, loggers, miners, and those who use the great outdoors for recreation. He pursues the law requiring federal and state governments to coordinate with local governments, and he speaks on the coordination tonight. He has worked with the coordination process, produced victories in 12 states so far. His fall against CARB, the EPA, the BLM, and Agenda 21. He is our last hope to shut down CARB and send Mary Nichols to prison. Let's welcome Fred Kelly Grant.
I don't know whether I can remember what to say tonight. I left my dairyman down in Stockton and came right here, so I don't have my notes. I don't know whether I can remember what I'm supposed to talk about. I think maybe I can. It's been a busy week and a very tiring week. And the next week is going to be a joy because I'm doing a workshop on coordination in Santa Rosa for 4 days, and that will be a relaxation. I'm representing a dairyman who has a dairy in Tracy, California. He's operated for 30 years without a complaint until 3 years ago, when the Water Board of California decided he should be put out of business. And so they started with one complaint after another, and he'd satisfy one complaint, and then they would have a bigger complaint. Unfortunately, when he got in touch with me and I came down to represent him, he had already signed a settlement agreement in which he agreed to close his ranch and sell his cows. And he did that without reading it. He's Portuguese. He doesn't like to read long documents, anything over a paragraph. This one was 22 pages long, written in legalese. I had to read it 4 times before I understood it. And he signed it and had signed away his right to operate his dairy and his right to keep his herd. And so I agreed to represent him and then find a way, after we got through the terms of the settlement agreement, find a way to challenge the jurisdiction of the board and hopefully wreck that settlement agreement. And so it's probably the toughest assignment I've ever taken on because it's pretty ironclad. They've done a good job of trying to fence him in, and I have to break through the fence somehow. And I have no doubt I can do it because I'm fairly devious. Having worked against organized crime in Baltimore for many years, and I've often said that was the best training I could have for fighting the federal government, because they operate the same. They operate from the standpoint that the person at the top makes the policy decision, and the guy at the bottom does it without thinking, and if he doesn't do it, then he disappears somewhere. Now, in organized crime, he disappears. In the federal government, he goes somewhere like Mobile, Alabama, and gets assigned there permanently. It used to be Butte, Montana. When I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore, an FBI agent who did the wrong thing got shipped to Butte. So when I was back there a few years ago to take a deposition in a death penalty case, by the way, we were back there because this defendant had been convicted and then sentenced to death on the testimony of an FBI agent who identified his heel print at the scene of the murder. However, he had misidentified it. It was a toe print, not a heel print. And when I got into the case and we found, and I got a good independent criminologist from Oakland, California, he said, this is not a heel, it's a toe. And he identified the shoe. It was a different size from the defendant even. So we went back to depose this guy, and in those days we had to go to Washington, D.C. to depose them. They wouldn't couldn't ship them around because they said they had not enough money. And so we were sitting in the FBI office, and as I was sitting there, one of the old agents that I knew when I was there walked through, and we had a few minutes greetings. And I said, hey, I was just talking about Butte, Montana. I said, where do guys go now when they get punished? And he said, Mobile, Alabama. So we went up to the 4th floor to take the deposition, and the first question was, your name and where are you stationed? He said, Mobile, Alabama. And I said, well, good. The federal government, excuse me, not only operates like the syndicate in levels and responsibility, but recently they've operated more like them in practice too. And that's gone on for a long time, but not as openly as it is now. I was just telling Paul that if things can be worked out, I'll be representing Clive and Bundy in the land case, the case where we attempt to show and will show that he owns that ranch, he owns the federal land, the so-called federal land. He owns it, and therefore he owed no grazing fees because it was his land. And I think we can trace it through a patent back to the federal government. I've agreed to take it with his wife. I talked with her Saturday night. I've agreed to take it if he and I can agree that I control the case, because I don't try cases that I can't control, and that's going to be a tough thing for him to stomach, I think. But we'll see. I will raise his issue, his theory, but I'll also raise mine. Whichever wins, wins. But at any rate, I also know that as of today, the investigator that's been working with me arranged, and I think after a three-hour session with a criminal attorney, very good criminal attorney from Omaha, she has the same counsel to represent all the members of the Bundy family in that case, so that we will have a good, competent criminal lawyer representing them too. One of the things that that has become very clear to me is that the killing of Finnegan was planned. It was first-degree murder. It was a planned assassination. We have a retired FBI agent who was skilled in kills, who has identified several spots in the video where he claims that it's very clear that this was a setup. I suspected it from the moment I saw it, because what was the purpose? What was it that the federal agents wanted them to do from the beginning? Leave the place. They wanted them to leave the building, leave the grounds. So when they know they're going to John Day for 7 hours, why do you roadblock them in? Why don't you let them go, get what you wanted, and then roadblock it so they can't get back in? Well, there's only one reason that I can think of, and that's you wanted them in there. You wanted them trapped in there. The shots began to hit that truck long before it got to the roadblock. Several bullets in the truck, and you can see it when the video slowed down. They were long rifles shooting at the truck. The man came out of the truck with his hands up, and the slower you move that video, the more you can see it. The young lady in the truck I talked to 3 or 4 days after, and she said that what he said was, they're going to kill us. If I get out and surrender, maybe I can draw them away from the rest of them. So he got out with the intention of surrendering, put his hands in the air, and got shot down. As of last night, the investigator that I have slowed it down even more, and we have about 12 different identification points that make it perfectly clear that this was a setup. And I think we now have some proof that the incident in Nevada was also a setup. A young man who was with an army group that had to survive in the desert and was a real death trap, and has become an expert on those things, and now has identified several places on the videos for us to show that that's true too. And it doesn't surprise me, because the federal government had to get the message out that when we go against somebody, you leave us alone, don't come around, don't mess around. Because you can lose your farm, you can lose your ranch, you can lose your herds, and you can lose your life. Well, most of the things I work on now are not nearly as dramatic as those. Coordination can be a very boring process when it's done right. And the only satisfaction that anybody gets out of it is seeing the federal government just come to a standstill, because they can't cope with it. They cannot deal with coordination as the law requires it and still have their way about running roughshod over landowners with their rules and their regulations. I'm going to tell you about a few of the cases I'm working on. I started coordination about 22 years ago, and some of you have heard me tell about this, but I'm going to say it again. One of my very good friends, Dick Bass, one of my old drinking buddies before I was forced to give it up 26 years ago. So I went in and drank my ginger ale while he had his scotch. He was a county commissioner in Hawaii County, and one night he said, I want you to look at something for me, because the BLM is requiring us to reduce grazing by 40%. And we have to do it by January, and this was, I think in November. It was in November. It was beginning to snow, but it wasn't Thanksgiving time yet. And he wanted me to go to a conference on that Saturday in Jordan Valley, a conference put on by the National Lands Conference that Bert Smith was part of. Some of you know Bert, I'm sure, from Ogden. And I said, Dick, I don't want to go up there. There's a game on that I want to see. Notre Dame's playing. I think they were playing USC. And I hardly miss those games when I can help it. I don't miss them. But he was so afraid of this, and I also told him, I said, there's no use in my going. If the federal government wants you off their land, you're going to be put off. You might as well find something else to do. Get out of the cattle business. Run a bar or something. I went because he was a friend, and that's the only reason. And he threatened to tell his wife that I wouldn't cooperate. And Karen was my classmate in school and used to hit me upside the back of the head quite often. So I knew I had to do it. So I drove up. And anybody who's gone on that last stage of the road from Marsing, Idaho to Jordan Valley in a snowstorm will know that he had to be a good friend for me to go. I sat there and I listened to Wayne Hage, who I'd never met. I listened to Karen Bud Fallon and to her husband as they put forward this county supremacy doctrine. And I listened to it just as long as I could, and I got up to leave, because there is no way in the world that a county is supreme to the United States government. The Constitution does not allow that type of supremacy. And I knew that the Idaho Supreme Court would not. I knew that the United States Supreme Court would not. So I figured I'd wasted my time. And I got up to leave, and as I started to leave, Bert Smith came over. I didn't know him. He introduced himself, and he said, your name is Grant. I said, yeah. He said, the Lowrys think you're pretty smart. And I said, well, the Lowrys don't have anybody else to help them, so they have to think I'm pretty smart. And he said, I take it you don't believe in what you're listening to. And I said, of course I don't. I said, the court, and I listed about 6 or 7 cases that I said the Supreme Court of the United States will knock this down and they won't even have to write an opinion on it. And he said, well, you're a smart guy. He said, if you just focus on local government, you'll find a way. And I was nice to him, and I thanked him, and I left. And all the way down through that snowstorm, I kept thinking about the earnestness of this man's eyes. I mean, he was dead serious. And anybody that would travel into Jordan Valley, Oregon, at the Idaho border, in that desolate country, at that time of the year, just to put on a show for 12 people, had to either be crazy or he had to be dedicated. And I decided on the dedicated part. I went to the law library the next Monday, and I didn't have court that day, so I just sat and I started looking. I looked through the Federal Land Policy Management Act, which I knew nothing about. You have to remember, I really believed that the federal government owned those grazing lands at the time. I had never done anything in this field at all. And I found a section in footnote that said that the federal government, the agency, shall coordinate with local government. And I saw that, and I thought, well, I don't know what coordinate means. They went on to explain it. Coordinate means that the local government has to be given early advance notice of anything that the agency is going to plan, not is planning, but going to plan. When they sit down at the planning board, they are supposed to notify the local government and let them be involved from that point on. The next thing is, it said that the agency shall be apprised of all local policies and practices and plans that might be in conflict with what they're planning to do. And then it said that once they've identified conflicts, they have to determine alternatives that can avoid those conflicts. And finally, they have to make every practicable effort, use every practicable means to reach consistency with the local policy. Now, I knew that the Owyhee County's commissioners, if they didn't have a policy, they could very easily write one that no grazing shall be reduced by 40% any time in life. And so I thought, I can't believe that the Congress left this opening. Now, I read the legislative history, and I found that Senator Packwood of Oregon had sponsored this amendment, and in his testimony to the committee, he said, if we don't do this, the Bureau of Land Management will run roughshod over the ranchers and local governments throughout the West. We have to put this in. So it was put in for the very purpose that I was looking for. And I thought, well, there will be a way out for them, but I can muck the system up for a couple of years with this. And I went back and told the ranchers that. And I told them how they could do this. They would have to have the commissioners. The three commissioners were there, and Bill Lowry, I think Bill was 72 at the time. I think he's 90 now. He was 70 at the time. And he turned to the commissioners and he said, Hal, you're the chairman. I want your commitment. If we do this, I want your commitment that the three commissioners will stand with your back straight against the BLM. Now, there were 70 ranchers in that room, which meant they were probably 7/10 of the number of votes that would vote at the next election in Owyhee County. And Hal gave his word. Hal was the only non-rancher on the board, so the other two were fine with it. Well, from that day, we started to write the Owyhee County Land Use Plan for the federally managed lands. I made that term up. I said, we don't want to admit that they own them, we want to say that they manage them. And that was the Owyhee County Plan, the very first one that was written for purposes of coordination. I got a call about, and this took us maybe 2 to 3 months. In the meantime, they had postponed the starting of their 40% reduction. So we kept track of that, and I knew we had time. And about 3 to 4, I said months, weeks later, I got a call from one of my friends in the Department of Justice in Washington, and he said, what in the devil are you doing in Oahu, Idaho? And I said, well, you got the name a little bit wrong, but I'm helping these ranchers out here try to beat your Department of Justice. And he said, well, somebody brought a plan in and said, what do you know about this Grant guy? And he said, well, what I know is that you better hope he's not on the other side. And of course I was. We sent a letter of notice to the BLM that we were going to require them to coordinate, and we got back a 6-page letter from the Department of Justice explaining why they didn't have to. And I already had the response ready showing why they did have to, including the legislative history. We argued with them back and forth for about 2 months, And then I sent the letter threatening to go to the district court and file a declaratory judgment action requiring them to coordinate and asking for attorney's fees and punitive damages. And they wrote the letter back saying they were immune to lawsuit, and I sent back the response, which I had ready, that we were going to sue the individuals as individuals, not the BLM, but each of their officials as persons. And we would ask for punitive damages from them, because as I said in the letter, it's not the agency. We know the agency will follow the law. You as individuals are the ones violating it. Well, that turned the corner with them. And they came to meet, and I can tell you that 21 years later, there has never been a reduction in grazing in Owyhee County. Not 40%, but not one single reduction in grazing. In fact, some of them have gotten back grazing that they had lost. Now here's the tragedy of it. We have a board of commissioners now in Owyhee County that didn't go through all this. Two of them have nothing to do with it. They're businessmen, and they have lost the ball, and the BLM is again threatening reductions on those ranchers. Coordination is one of those things that the gentleman who started this evening with the prayer spoke about Sir Winston Churchill. And you know that one of the most ringing quotations from Churchill to this day with me is, never give up. Never give up. Never give up. Well, that's what you have to do with coordination. Because you win once doesn't mean you've won. You have to stick with it. Because the federal government is like Frankenstein's monster. It just keeps coming. And you can knock it down, but it will come again as soon as you let up your guard. So far, I haven't gone out to help them because I've got so many other cases, but I know I will at some point. As soon as I meet with the Lowrys, I'm sure I will. And it will be a new problem, because the BLM has changed people too. The ones that we had trained in coordination have been promoted and moved on because they were running a district that had so few problems. And so what coordination did was get them promotions. And as people moved up and from outside that had never done this, now we've got to start all over again. The same with the Forest Service. The Forest Service is the most obnoxious agency that I ever have had to deal with. They're worse than Fish and Wildlife Service. They're worse than the EPA, just because they will not listen to sense, and I think that they are taught to read without understanding. Because you can, for example, this says former Assistant United States Attorney and current property rights attorney. I could have one of them read that, and he would swear that it said I was a former property rights attorney and currently an Assistant United States Attorney. I think it's in their discipline that they do that, because with the Forest Service, things are so simple. BLM is a complicated agency. Running the rangelands is complicated compared to what the Forest Service has to do. If the Forest Service still did what they're supposed to do and allowed logging and allowed contracts, they would have nothing to do, because private companies would take care of the forest, and they would take care of it well. You wouldn't find millions of acres burning each year. They wouldn't let that timber burn, because when it burns, it means money. It means money to everybody. It means not only a loss of money to the citizens, but it means the imposition of huge, huge costs to have to restore, to pay for the firefighters, and then to restore what they can of the forest. Well, the Forest Service I undertook for Modoc County in California. We had been into the coordination business in Owyhee County for probably almost a year, and we were having some success. And they heard about it in Modoc County, and And Sean Curtis and Carolyn Carey came to Oahu, and to see how we did it, and I helped them put together their plan. And for the next 5 years, there were only 2 counties in the United States who were having luck with the Forest Service and the BLM because we had coordination in place. Malheur County, Oregon, which sits right on the border of Hawaii County, every time the commissioners went to a meeting of the tri-states, Malheur County complained about the fact that they were favorites of the BLM. We don't understand why you guys get such breaks. They said, well, we use coordination. Oh, that doesn't work. Well, it was working. In Elmore County, where the Mountain Home and the Air Base sits, they think that they're above Hawaii County because people had moved in there from the cities as they stayed after their Air Force careers ended. And they really think that they know more about the West than Hawaii County does. And so they didn't want to coordinate because they felt they were above the BLM. They didn't have to worry about it. Well, there were some roads that were closed along the Owyhee River, just above where it is joined by the Bruno River. And the roads were closed on both sides of the river, on the Owyhee County side and on the Elmore County side. And we called on the BLM to coordinate and to open those roads on the Owyhee County side because our policy was you don't close any RS 2477 without permission of the Board of Commissioners and the Sheriff of the county. And your sheriffs in Northern California have made that stick with the RS 2477 on the basis of the police power, public health and safety. So they opened ours, but they kept Elmore counties closed because Elmore County didn't demand that they be open. At the next meeting of commissioners, the Elmore County commissioners complained about it, and they said, you guys, you got to keep your roads open. And our commissioner said, yeah, we use coordination. Oh, that doesn't work. Well, everybody that said it didn't work for them. So it worked for those 2 counties, and eventually, people heard about it, and eventually counties throughout Idaho and in Wyoming and Utah and Montana and Oregon began to use the coordination process. The Forest Service was still the recalcitrant agency. And finally, the 5 counties, they were Del Norte, Siskiyou, Shasta, Modoc, and one other one, and I can't remember what the other one was that I was trying to remember on the way down today, way up today. And I don't remember the other county, but 5 counties hired me to sue the Forest Service to reopen the roads after they closed them under the travel management plan. They used the travel management plan to close down roads in the forest, and the travel management plan itself said that they had to coordinate with local government, but they didn't. And so they hired me to work as lead counsel with the county attorneys to sue the Forest Service. I had just been to the Andrus Council on Public Lands at Boise State University. And I spoke there on the Owyhee Initiative, which was a bill that I worked for under 12 years with Senator Crapo and the ranchers to try to solve the problem and settle the disputes between the Wilderness Society and the ranchers over wilderness in Owyhee County. And we did. There were certain of the lands that the ranchers had no problem with wilderness. They couldn't graze in them. They were deep canyons, and so they didn't have any problem with it. So we ironed those out, and we got all of that done. They wanted me to speak to this the coalition conference on how we made that work. And I knew Tom Tidwell, the chief of the Forest Service, was there. And so I took my opportunity to say it worked because the BLM follows the law. The BLM coordinates when the county insists on it. The Forest Service doesn't. The Forest Service ignores the law, violates the law. And I saw that it got his attention. So after the session, he came up and asked Andrus to introduce him. I was counsel to Cecil Andrus, and counsel to John Evans, both of whom were Democrats, and both of whom were the two most conservative governors in the history of Idaho. There hasn't been a Republican governor since that's been as conservative as they were. So I fit in well with them. And I met Tidwell, and he said, what is this coordination thing? And I said, well, it's a process that you have in your planning rules. It's a process that's in the National Forest Management Act. It's a process that there's a Secretary of Agriculture's memorandum that says you shall coordinate. And he said, I guess I better do some reading. And I said, well, I'll send you this white paper that I've put together. And he asked me to do that. So what I did was style it as a brief. And when I sent it to him, I said, I've been hired by these counties to sue you, and this is the brief I'll use. Well, he called for me to come back to Washington. I went back and met with his two top planners and went over the brief with them. They asked me to go see the regional forester in Sacramento, and I did. And I sat down with him and we talked for an hour, and he kept trying to tell me that cooperating agency was the way to go, that this was a beautiful thing. The counties could come in and they would cooperate, and the Forest Service would cooperate with them, and I said, I've seen it work. It really does work. The counties give you input, you ignore it and go ahead in your own way, and that's cooperating agency. They cooperate with you because they don't sue you. I said, you know that your boss told you you had to coordinate or I wouldn't be here. And I've got other things to do, so let's get on with it. And he said, all right. He said, I've got a memo, and he showed it to me, a memo to the supervisors of those 5 forests that they must coordinate from that point on. And immediately they reopened all those travel management plans in those 5 forests in Northern California. Now that's been, what, 4 or 5 years ago? Today, they're closing the roads again. You've got about a 5-year respite, and then you've got to go against them all over again, except in Siskiyou County, where John Lopey, the sheriff, told the Forest Service supervisor in my presence, you will not close a road in this county unless I say it's safe for the public health and safety to close the road. You will not do it, or you will have somebody in jail. And they haven't closed a road in Siskiyou County, not at all. We had a sheriff like that in Owyhee County. Gary Amon was the sheriff. He did the same with the BLM. He did the same after he and I spent some hours researching. He did the same with the IRS. He did the same with the FBI. Nobody came into Owyhee County to serve a warrant, but what they stopped at the sheriff's office first. Whether they were confiscating cows or arresting a bank robber, they came to the sheriff's office first. And if he wanted to, then he sent people with them. But they did not do it on their own. A lot of people said, well, that was very magnanimous of them because they didn't have to do that. And I said, if you think that they would have done that if they didn't have to, you're sadly mistaken. It's a blow to the ego of any federal agent to think that they've got to go to the lowly sheriff and ask him for permission to execute a warrant. But we did it. Unfortunately, Gary had been elected 3 times and thought that he didn't have to run, and he got beat by 2 votes by a sheriff who now has done away with that policy, and the feds go through Owyhee County just as though they own it. Again, you have to just stay. Sir William Gladstone, one of the great prime ministers of England, said that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And it is the truth. You have to stay on it all the time. And if you lose at any point, if you lose that sharpness, you lose to the federal government. One of the things I notice is that you're going to have debates of candidates for the county supervisors. You know, if I were you, I would tell them in advance that you'd like them to discuss with you the benefits of coordination by the county. See if they even know what it is, but if they look and find out what it is, then find out if they would do it. Because if they won't do it, if somebody says, no, we can't do that, I wouldn't vote for them, frankly. Because it means, number one, they can't read, Number 2, they can't read with knowledge. Or 3, they're just obstinate and liberal. So it's one of the 3 it has to be. The Forest Service, right now, the cases that I have, well, by the way, there are 60 jurisdictions in the nation that use coordination today, and it works for them. In Fremont County, Wyoming, it's one of the big victories that I really love this one. The Forest Service and the BLM were going to close all the campgrounds in Fremont County. Fremont County sits just out of West Yellowstone. The Wilderness Society and all the other groups of environmentalists, and I don't like to say environmentalists, but we haven't come up with another term. The environmentalists are the ranchers and the farmers and the people who take care of the land because they care about it. They aren't the people that set rules that are arbitrary rules, and they really don't care what happens to a forest. If you are in a group that opposes logging to the point where the forests are ready to burn, you can't be an environmentalist. I can't help it. You just can't be. And it's a misuse of the term. Environmentalist radicals, let's say, had done away with grazing. They had done away with logging. The only thing left in Fremont County was recreation and tour guides, and they used these campgrounds going into and out of Yellowstone. Well, the Forest Service, at the urging of the BLM, planned to close the campgrounds. And the reason is that some of the trees were diseased, and they were afraid the trees would fall on the campers and hurt them and they'd be liable. My question to them was, why don't you cut the diseased trees down and leave the campgrounds open? Well, no, we can't do that. That would be cutting a tree. I said, yeah, diseased tree, would be. Well, through the coordination, we were able to get the commissioners at the table for the writing of that plan for the campgrounds. And finally, and the supervisor, the forest supervisor, tried again for cooperating agency. They said, we've done that for 10 years and we've never seen one of our comments mentioned, much less used. And so she coordinated, she sat through meetings, she listened to them. Finally she said, okay, I'm ready with my draft, I'll send it to Washington, and as soon as it's approved and comes back, I'll show it to you. And I said, no, that's not the way it works. You show it to them first. And if there's a conflict there, they will tell you about it, and then you have to do you just have to use every practical means to work that conflict out. Oh, well, no, I've never done it that way. I said, I'm sure you haven't, but that's the way the law says. You will do it that way. I can't do it that way. Well, I'll call our solicitor, and I said, I'm glad you will. Call her, here's her number, and she'll tell you what she said to me day before yesterday. You're right. They have to go through it with the board before it goes back to Washington. So she brought it in. There was a conflict. They worked it out. It went to Washington, got approved, and they managed to cut down diseased trees and keep the campgrounds open. That's not quite as big as the Trans-Texas Corridor, but it was almost more pleasing. The Trans-Texas Corridor was Governor Perry. I noticed this morning that somebody is trying to resurrect him as a conservative substitute for a Republican nominee. Conservative? Has anyone looked at Texas under his rule? The Department of Transportation that we were fighting down there has an annual budget higher than Southwest Airlines. They've got 8 planes that they fly that are bigger than Southwest Airlines. And he decided that the Trans-Texas Corridor was a must. It had to be. Trans-Texas Corridor was a quarter-mile wide toll road that ran from the Mexican border of Texas to the Oklahoma border. And it would have been the first leg of the NAFTA superhighway. Now actually the beginning of it was at a little port city on the coast of Mexico that by coincidence had been bought and built by China. And so And there was to be no U.S. customs anywhere along that road throughout Texas. So shipments from China would come in, go by Mexican truck, which had no safety requirements of any kind, all the way through Texas, and there was one customs spot planned, and it was to be run by the Mexican government halfway through Texas. So there would be no customs, United States customs inspections anywhere. And the plan was that all along that NAFTA superhighway there would be no U.S. customs anywhere along it. And this was part of the wonderful tri-country union that President Bush had arranged with Vicente Fox and with the Canadian Prime Minister, in which he warned them, don't talk openly about the Amero as the replacement for the dollar because our people are paranoid about that. And that was the president's words, President Bush, another good conservative. Perry was insistent that nothing was going to stop that quarter-mile toll road. It was owned by a Spanish company. The Spanish company would collect all the tolls. The Spanish company had all of the utility rights along that highway, and every utility was going to have to relay their corridors. Everybody was going to have to pay for that, for the new corridors, and be paying the Spanish company. And he said, no is not an option. It's going to be built. This quarter-mile toll road ran through the town of Holland, as though this room were Holland, and could be 1,500 people. As though it ran through it right down this corridor. The hospital in Holland sat over here on this side, and if there was an accident over here, the ambulance had to go 7 miles, cross the highway and come back 7 miles, and then come back 14 miles to get the injured people to the hospital. The school district was split. They were going to have 2 different school districts. Everything was split. And it was the same in all 4 little towns. The total population was 6,000. And why in the world I thought that I could help with Margaret and Dan Byfield of American Stewards of Liberty, who I was with at the time. How in the world we thought that we could take those 4 little towns and stop that juggernaut, I don't know. Fortunately, I had given up drinking long ago, or I would have put it off to an alcohol haze. But we undertook it. These 4 little mayors, just from the day one, they just looked like they were at the top of anybody's game, like as though they were prime ministers of countries. And in that room, which was about as big as this one, it was the town hall in Holland. And the first day we had a meeting, the ladies were having their weekly quilting bee in the back. And they went on with it. And at one point, May Smith, who was the mayor of Holland, got real feisty with the federal agent, and the ladies put their quilts down and applauded her. And these high-ranking federal people looked as though they were just aghast. Who in the world had dragged them into this place where quilters applauded the mayor? One of the mayors always had to leave at 2:30 because he was the crossing guard for the school kids that got out. And on his phone, the ringer on his phone was a rooster crowing. So when that rooster crowed, he had to get up and leave and go and guard the crossing. And we won. We won. 27 months into this thing, the EPA said to their people down there, and they said to the Department of Transportation, get out of there because these towns are going to beat you. They've got a record that you can't win on. Now, how do we know that? Because what Governor Perry announced the next day is, I've listened to the voices of Texans, and we're abandoning that. And what we read, and one of the reasons I read the New York Times whenever I can is because well, there's 2 reasons. I've always told people this. First of all, I know what our people are saying. I'd like to read what the other side's saying, and the Times is a great place to read that. But in addition to that, you get a lot of news from Europe. And the Spanish newspaper had reported, in covering this, the Spanish government's endeavor over here, had reported that the United States EPA had told the towns to pull out. So we knew that was the way it happened. That probably to date is really the biggest victory we've had, and it shows what can be done because we had absolutely no resources, none whatsoever. We had to furnish our own notebooks, our own pens, and I got quite a few pens out of it. I collect pens. I have about 4,000, much to my wife's dismay. And whenever somebody loans me a pen, they have to watch it because I'll take it. But we had nothing. We had absolutely nothing. And the towns had nothing. They didn't have supplies. They didn't have anything. We used our own phone service. We used the resources were Margaret, Dan, and I. I remember the day about 14 months into it, we had been trying to get the EPA to respond. And I finally wrote a pretty damning letter to them. And my office was in Idaho at the time. And Dan called me and he said, "Hey, the EPA has agreed to come to our next meeting." I said, "Great." He said, "What do we do now?" And I said, "I don't know. I've never had the regional office of the EPA give in so easily, so I got to think about it." Well, we had it thought out by the time they got there, but this was a first. This was the first time they had responded. To date, I've beaten the EPA 5 times out of 5 opportunities. And when I say I've beaten them, you have to understand that it is personal with me. It's about America, but it's personal with me too, because I don't like to lose. And especially I don't like to lose to the federal government. I was there for a while as an assistant U.S. attorney. I know how they work. I know how I was required to work when I was there. And anytime you get a chance to beat them, you want to beat them. Because it is a lesson that they have to learn. In the past 7 months, because of my work on CARB, and because of my work against the EPA and certain other things, my phone's been hacked, my bank account's been frozen, my computers have been hacked, and now I speak as though I understand that they're listening, and they get an earful quite often because of it. They have such power that I know that if, in fact, Bundy, for example, agrees with my terms, and I represent them, I know full well what will happen. The heat is going to come on real bad, real hard. And my wife is a bit afraid for she and our granddaughter and our daughter-in-law. And I'm not, because I don't think they'll do anything. But I'm not, because I'm 80, and anything they do to me is just going to hurry things along. So, they're welcome to come in.
Patriot right there.
I'm representing 2 miners in Montana. One is 84. He's a veteran of the Korean War. He was in the Air Force in Korea, and when his time in the Air Force was up, he joined the Army so that he could stay in the Army and stay in Korea, but they shipped him back to the U.S. This crowd remembers. I speak to crowds that don't remember what I'm going to tell them now. When John Kennedy faced down Khrushchev over Cuba and over the shipment of missiles in, George's unit was sent to a portion of Turkey where there was a death sentence on any American that was found there. And so they were embedded there, and if they had been found, they would have been killed. They were there for the purposes of shooting out of the air any guided missile that was launched against the United States, just in case that didn't go right. So here's a man who risked his life in Korea, risking it again later when he could have been home free. Phil Napo, his 65-year-old partner, was in Vietnam for 2 years. and in combat. It was not a, it was a strictly combat position. He suffers greatly from Agent Orange's effects. They have this mine that they're operating on, and the federal government is doing everything they can to take it away from them. One of the reasons is because they have a mountain that they have, and they have a private property claim to this mine site based on the Act of 1872. His parent, George's ancestors staked this claim before the federal government changed the law so that you can no longer claim a privately owned mine site. The mountain that they haven't touched yet has in it collections of rare earth. And China, it is well known now, China's supply of rare earth is being depleted. The Chinese have been to look at that mountain, accompanied by NASA of the United States. In fact, one of the Chinese people broke tradition and came and talked to George and left his card for him and said that if you ever decide to sell the mountain, you don't have to go through your government, come right to us. And frankly, I've told him, if it gets to the place where it looks like I'm going to lose, we'll sell it to China. Let them deal with the United States government. They'll mind it. At any rate, they right now are without money, and we've undertaken to represent them in hopes that there will be contributions that come to help. The dairyman I'm representing here in California, and I'm about to be ready to file the lawsuit against CARB and the EPA because I'll combine the two of them. I don't know whether you folks know that in this build-up to CARB, they ran tests and they subjected human beings to 12 hours in air-sealed rooms subjected to diesel exhaust fumes. And some of the humans were 10 years old, which is a violation of federal law, state law, and international law. Nobody's in jail for it. Nobody's been charged with it. And the medical schools that participated in it were Stanford, UCLA, USC, and Duke. And all of them did. So hopefully, when we finally get a lawsuit filed, we'll be able to charge those folks with civil violations of rights. Now, the reason they did this is that they have not been able to prove that diesel exhaust fumes cause air problems. The reason they haven't is that the soot from the diesel is so heavy, it doesn't go in the air. It drops on the ground. And they can't quite fathom why they can't prove air quality problems from it. But since they couldn't, they decided to expose the humans to this so that they could prove damage. The unfortunate thing is they couldn't prove damage even after these tests. And yet they go right on as though these rules are necessary to protect you Californians from bad air. The filters that are required to comply with this law are the cause of the school bus fires that you see. They're the cause of the fires with trucks that you've seen, and we have proof of that. In addition to that, we have some Caltrans workers who testified in Reading that when they get these new trucks fitted with the filters, they'll run for a couple of days and then they're broken down for 3 days. And so what you have is about a 60% loss in efficiency by the use of these trucks. And what you have also is independent truckers that are going out of business because they can't afford to put filter. A gentleman who I really have the greatest respect for him, he's been very helpful to me, has a 1988 Peterbilt, which ought to have another 2 million miles. He's allowed to run it 5,000 miles a year by car. That's the rule. And at the end of this year, at the end of 2016, he has to destroy it. Not just quit using it, but destroy it. Shasta Community College had to destroy $180,000 worth of heavy equipment that they used to teach their classes. And then the government spent $1.5 million replacing it. Now that's the kind of idiocy that causes you to have to pay I've forgotten what it was today I had to pay for. I can't remember now. Some idiocy, and I knew that the reason is that you need all this money. You need all this money to replace the equipment that's doing no harm to anybody. The water board, my dairyman in Tracy, is being subjected to tests by the water board that make no sense. To me, they don't, and to the experts. But it costs him to pay for my fees. It costs him to pay for the expert fees. And we won't ever get that back even when we win in court. Because judges will not allow attorney's fees and costs against the government. They just won't. And so he will be out. I think we'll win.
Yeah.
But he will be out maybe as much as $250,000 in order to defend himself. There's an owner of a nursery who is near Tracy, and his nursery is somewhere in North California. He has spent $1 million with Pacific Legal Foundation against the water board, and they still haven't even been in trial. They haven't been to court yet. So those cases I have. In addition to that, I have a man in Idaho who went to gun shows. He was licensed. He went to gun shows selling his guns. The ATF people came in and seized his guns and arrested him. They had sent an informant in to buy a gun. They had given her fake ID, but it looked real. I've seen it. It looks real. She had other cards to corroborate that ID. She didn't show up on his list, so he sold her a pistol, and within a half hour, the ATF people arrested him. Then they got a warrant, went into his house, and seized his guns and his computers. And he went to an attorney who pledges that she's an expert in ATF cases. Her website shows her with automatic weapons and of all kinds, but doesn't show her in court anywhere. She wrote one letter for him demanding the guns back, but she waited until the limitations period had run. It got there a day late, and they said, sorry, but you missed the deadline, and she charged him $5,000 for it. So I have it free now because he doesn't have any more money. When you combine the federal government, you combine the state governments who are following EPA as toadies because they have to because of federal money and grants. When you combine all that with the crookedness of the Bar Association, individuals in this country are really at risk. And I frankly have never been more disappointed in being an attorney than I have been when I started seeing these cases, because attorneys just take advantage of the fact that they know that the folks that are in trouble with these agencies are in real trouble, and they charge them outlandish fees. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. Follow any suggestions that you have. If you've got better ideas on some of these things, you tell me about it. What I am going to ask you to do is to read the inside of your program, because I have never asked for donations before, never. But I have to now, because of the fact that I'm representing people who don't have the means to fight the fight. And what I did this especially for Tea Party members, because you have made a difference. The Tea Parties are the only group of people that have made a difference in the last 20 years in politics in this country. When you sent people to the House of Representatives, you sent people that believed in principle. And unfortunately, you didn't quite do the same job in the Senate, but right now it's pretty close. And if the elections went the right way, which I don't know whether they will, if they go the right way, you could get control of the Senate too. But what we're asking is, the one thing that's wrong in that is that I was planning to represent LaVoy Finicum's widow. And if I represent the Bundys, I can't represent her. And the Bundy Ranch, to me, that's the prime case that we have to win. If we don't win that, then the government can take any ranch that they want to take anywhere in the country. The rest of the cases are in there, except that I pick up a new one every once in a while. And what we've said is that if everybody that we come in contact with gave $25, we would have a war chest enough to fight the government with the right resources and beat them. And so I ask all of you to dig into your consciences and decide whether the fight is worth it. The fight on these cases, because they're the ones that are listed there, they're the ones that will be supported. And decide whether or not it's worth $25. And some of you can give more than that, I know. There's a lady in New York right now who's considering our request for $250,000. I don't know whether she'll come through. She did one time. Her father is the one that gave $10 million to Ted Cruz. And my position with her was, you know, for $300,000, we could probably do more to change things through the coordination effort than Ted will be able to change, even if he's President of the United States. I worked with Herman Cain briefly when he was running for president. I was introduced to him by Mark Bloch. I went up to I think it's called the Eagle Forum or whatever it is. It was Ames Cartwright. Paul, you know Ames, I think, the heir to the Union Pacific people. And they told me I'd have 10 minutes with Herman. I said, well, why doesn't he just autograph his book and give it to me, and I'll save him time, because I can't tell him anything in 10 minutes. I walked into the office, and he said, young man, what can you tell me about how I can change the country? And I said, nothing. You can't change it. And that got his attention, so I was there an hour and 40 minutes. I said, every president has 90 days in which he can rescind any regulation that has been issued since the election. So all of these post-election time regulations that get put in can be rescinded without cause, without reason. And I said, nobody since John Kennedy has done it. Nobody since Kennedy has done it. And when we finished, he said, would you come with me and take charge of the rescissions? I said, I would be more than happy to be the czar of rescissions. My wife started looking for a house in Georgetown. She didn't understand as much about political things as I do, but unfortunately, I went to Atlanta, helped him write his platform, and while I was on the plane back to Idaho, he announced his withdrawal from the race. And it's too bad, because I still think that he was the only qualified man to run for the presidency from his time to now. Because he had made it in business, he had the right political attitude, he didn't upset every faction of the party, and he was a good man. At any rate, when we talked about it, he asked me that day, he said, what presidents do you think, in your mind, have been good presidents? And I said, I'll tell you the three conservatives, the three good conservatives, and two other conservatives that weren't quite as successful. John Kennedy, Harry Truman first, John Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan. And in between, you could put Eisenhower and Ford, but Ford wasn't there long enough to really have an impact. And he said, Kennedy. And I said, of course. Who was the last man to say to the Secretary of Treasury that you will not issue another silver certificate unless you've got $1 worth of silver to back it up? In an executive order that was rescinded by Lyndon Johnson on the plane back from Texas. He had signed a memorandum to get our troops out of Vietnam, to begin the withdrawal in 30 days. And that was rescinded by Johnson on the plane back from Texas. Reagan, we know. We know that he was a conservative. Those three put into place things that were gotten rid of almost immediately by their successors. And what else brings them all together? Any other significant thing about all of them that comes to any of your minds?
Money.
What?
Money brings them all together.
Well, anybody else? They all were nearly killed or were killed. Kennedy was assassinated. They tried to assassinate Truman. They almost killed Reagan. They tried twice to kill Eisenhower and twice to kill Ford. Every conservative president in my lifetime has either been assassinated or attempted at assassination. And by whom? By Americans. Not by foreigners, not by ISIS, but by Americans. By people who were in the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us about. And there was one other president that warned us about things that are happening in every agency of government today. Any of you ever read George Washington's farewell address to the nation? I urge you to do that. And look at the things he warned us against, and they are exactly what's happening today. The man had such insight into the ways of the American people that he knew that greed would someday step in. As Benjamin Franklin said, this Constitution is a great document as long as godly men are running the government under it. And we don't have that today. The defense of the Constitution of the United States has to be in your hands. It has to be down here at the ground level, because it isn't happening up above. It just isn't. Well, I've wandered, I know, because I didn't come with any special speech to give other than to ask you to please go home and think deeply about contributing to our cause. And in your program, it tells you the website that you can go to donate. It's www.standandfightclub.com, or you can send a check to the address there. And I ask you all to do that. We set it at a place where, and I know that anything is a sacrifice today, but we set it at a place where we thought that American people can think that they're doing something and not have to pay a fortune for it. So that I ask you to do. And for that, I'll answer any questions you have. Or I'll shut up and go away.
I have one back here, Fred. When I heard you speak last month, I believe it was in Elk Grove, in passing, you made a statement that you wanted to see Mary Nichols in prison. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. I'd love to see it. She has violated California law repeatedly. She's violated federal law repeatedly. She is the one that passed personally on having the tests with the diesel fumes, the diesel exhaust fumes. That's a violation even of the Nuremberg Treaty. Now, we didn't subscribe to the treaty, but nevertheless, it's international law. It is against 3 California laws and against 3 federal laws. And that alone should put her in prison. But we could go on. I can list, and I have, and I'll try to send it to Larry, the paper that I've done on all of the violations that she's committed, that if you had done them, you'd be in jail. If Cliven Bundy had done them, he'd be in jail. Paul Creston would be in jail if he'd done them. But Mary Nichols isn't, because she is the choice. She was to be, you know, the head of the EPA. And the head of the EPA was to be the head of CARB. Now, who made the choice and the change? I think they got the worst one for CARB. She definitely ought to be in jail. Have you seen the movie The Big Short? Or read the book about the bank, the mortgage fiasco? Not a single one of those guys is in jail. Not a single one of them. And yet we jail people for walking on the wrong side of the street. We jail people for on their own property for doing things such as collecting rainwater in Oregon. I don't know how in the name of God we can keep on doing that. And one of the things that I'm going to ask the board to ask for is for criminal charges to be brought against her when we do the findings on that.
question.
They ask you, back to John F. Kennedy, wasn't Kennedy also assassinated because he wanted to go back to the gold standard, which we didn't have?
Absolutely.
Wasn't Lincoln also assassinated for about the same thing, even though there was a civil war between the North and the South?
That's exactly right.
That's what I.
Exactly right. Lincoln not only had insisted that the silver be replenished, but he wanted to go back to the gold standard. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the great parallel between the two of them.
I do a little bit of homework too.
Yeah. Yeah, they,
Thank you.
a lot of people misunderstand John Kennedy because they just look at the fact that he was rich and he came from a liberal family and from liberal Massachusetts.
Another question, Mr.
I have a question. The current president is obviously not a native-born American. It is a known fact that has been hushed down and hushed down and hushed down. And now I hear you endorse Cruz, which is also not a natural-born American citizen.
Well, you're right, but that doesn't seem to matter anymore. It didn't matter with the current president. He's been in for 8 years. But we have people in control of elections, we have people in control of the laws, that those things don't matter. It's a matter of policy. It's a matter of policy. And if you're going to do their policy, if you're going to put their policy in effect, then you can skirt the law. Unfortunately, that is the truth.
Another question here, Mr. Grant.
My name is Roger Rankin, and I have been sort of exposing my white van with the United States Constitution poster on either side of it, not for attention, but simply to find out who responds to it. And I find that many people, even young kids, all the way up to, and I'm 71, senior citizens are unfamiliar to a great degree with the wording
That's right.
in the Constitution.
That's right.
So my question is, because I'm asked frequently, people kneeling on the ground and studying it probably for the first time, is there some medium that would address the age groups that are certainly not being taught or aren't familiar with it on a regular basis, that they could access or they could be given? And I know that this is available, which brings me to another question, because I'm familiar with the use of the word organic constitution versus what I think this is. But I'm not really sure which ones, because it's the Constitution for the United States versus the Constitution of the United States, which...
I started studying the Constitution when I was in the 8th grade. We had to memorize the preamble in the 8th grade. I thought that was horrible that I had to memorize that. But when I was in high school then, college, I had to do an honors paper. And so I drew a topic out of a hat. And it was the genesis of the Articles of Confederation. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. Well, my research was all of the debates for the Articles of Confederation. And those debates ended up with a group of articles that didn't suffice, but they were the preliminaries to the Constitution. And I can tell you that, and I say this as a fact from reading every page of it, never was that of concern to the founders. Sometimes we get upset over some technicality like that. Didn't bother them at all. What they were after were the principal foundations that we had to put our government on. And one of the things in the Articles of Confederation in the Congress was the problem of the Western lands. And so help me, from that time to this, the problems of the Western lands have never left the format. So I don't know which is right, whether it's of or for. I don't know which is right. What I do know is that I have read the original Constitution that is on display in the Library of Congress. I think it's the Library of Congress. I've read it all, and it says I think, I can't remember now which it says, but at any rate, I don't think it matters. I think what matters is the first part of your question. How do we teach people what's in there? How do we teach them the importance of what's in there? And if you're watching TV now, you see the young people that are coming to these political rallies. It's astounding to me. They're coming to Trump's rallies. They're coming to Cruz's rallies. They're coming to rallies where we never saw young people before. Somehow we have to tap that in, and I think maybe Paul is the one to ask about that. How do we do it? I see that you're teaching classes in the Constitution, but you're probably not getting teenagers in there. And that's what we need. I don't mean we not need, we need also what you're doing, but we need to get to the kids and have them understand, as we did coming up, that the Constitution was a document that protected them. The Constitution was a document, even kids that didn't know what was in there, in my classes, they knew that it was important. They knew that it protected them. They knew that it protected their homes and they protected our country. My brothers, one was very intelligent. He went in the Air Force when the Second World War started. The other one wasn't. And he enlisted right at the last minute to, I've got one up here, thank you, to go in the Navy. And he was on an LST that landed at every port that MacArthur took when he was taking back the Pacific. And he later said, if I'd been halfway smart, I could have been in the Air Force and sitting back in the United States like Bobby, reading the Constitution. He never got over the fact that my older brother knew the Constitution front and back, and Jack didn't. All Jack knew is that when he got picked up by a cop, he would say, the Constitution protects me. And it always did. But the point you make is vital to us as a nation. We've got to teach teenagers. We've got to get them involved. One of the things that I'm going to do is, and I'm going to talk about it at the workshop in Santa Rosa this week, I'm going to start holding workshops with intensive training of coordination. Because here's the situation. You can't get a lot of lawyers interested in coordination because you don't make a lot of money at it. When you teach people to do it, and even if you go ahead and help them, it's like an hour at a time, and you can't make the outlandish fees that I see lawyers making. So what we have to do is find people like you who become completely immersed in how to make this work so that you can do it on a volunteer basis with your county governments, with your local government. I hate to say this, there are no officials here, right? No elected officials? Is that what you said? They're lazy. Yeah. They're lazy. And I don't mean all of them, some of them aren't, but a lot of them are. And so you have to help them. And that's not a bad thing to do. Volunteers have helped the government from the time of the Revolution. So if you see one of those and you're interested in it, and there will be some in Northern California, come and learn, not just hearing somebody talk about it, but learn how to make it work. Learn all of the elements. There's a provision in every federal statute that deals with natural resources that requires coordination. Every agency, including Homeland Security, has to coordinate if the government just will make them. And it doesn't work just with counties. One of the most effective I've had is a soil conservation district in Arizona. A cemetery district in South Dakota won a major victory for ranchers back there. So it doesn't matter the size of the district as long as it's local elected officials. Okay.
I was wondering if you work with Judicial Watch, American Center for Law and Justice, and Alliance for Defense of Freedom.
I'm sorry, would you ask again?
Yeah, I was wondering if you work with Judicial Watch, American Center for Law and Justice, and Alliance in Defense of Freedom. I'm members of these three organizations.
I use their websites, I use their information, but I've never had occasion to work with them. But I use, with great need, I use their resources. Very much so. Yes, sir. And then I think we better get on to Paul, huh?
Other question, Mr. Grant?
Thank you. In listening to talk radio, I have become aware of Article 5, and I'd like to have your input on what you think about Article 5.
You mean the Fifth Amendment?
I'm sorry, yes.
The Fifth Amendment?
Yes.
The Fifth Amendment is, to me, the second most important that we have. I think the First Amendment is the most important. I think that we could probably function as a free nation if we had just the First Amendment, because I think you could write everything into that. The freedom of speech is the most important thing we have. Freedom of press right behind it. Freedom of religion. And we have a Supreme Court that screwed those up. Because they don't, the First Amendment, let me just say this, then I'll get to the Fifth. This is one of my pet peeves. The First Amendment says, there shall be no establishment of a religion. How did the court switch from that to separation of church and state? The Constitution does not say separation of church and state. It says, there shall be no establishment of religion. And they had to turn that so that they could do away with prayer in school, so that they could do away with the Bible reading in school, and so that they could get all these other rules that the people who are opposed to Christianity and to the religions that believe in ceremony wouldn't have access to the public facilities. Okay, now, the Fifth Amendment has a clause in it that talks about what? Double jeopardy? You all heard that?
Talking about Article 5, Convention of States.
I think he said the Fifth Amendment.
Well, actually, I was inquiring about Article 5 of the Convention of States.
Okay, in what way?
In the sense that, well, there's two stories, I'm sorry, there's two stories going around, and I don't know who's on first. But one says that you must employ the legislators of 3/4 of the states, or 2/3, I guess. The other story I've heard is there's an "or" word in there that says you can either employ the legislators or the people, excluding the legislators if they don't want to play ball with having a convention of states.
And what does the language say? What do you think it means?
Well, I would like it to think that it was, if the legislators were willing to go along with the program of having a convention, that's great, and there have been some that are signed up for it. But the will of the people is more employed, 100 signatures per district is what I read, per state. And then they would exclude all the, who knows what flag they're waving.
Can I see the language a bit? My position always has been that if there's any choice at all in the Constitution, this goes back to my Articles of Confederation research, it comes down in favor of the people. I wrote an article not long ago that says we the people are the government.
Amen.
The officials of the government are employees of ours.
Right.
But we are the government. We are the government that the founders intended to rule the country. Okay, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states shall call a convention. I think, to me, the superseding, the most powerful one is if the people decide that they want a constitutional convention. My friend Nick Dranius and I, Nick is a brilliant guy. You know Nick? Are you familiar with the name? He was with the Goldwater Institute when I first became a senior fellow. That's when I knew I was old. They named me a senior fellow at Goldwater. But Nick's a brilliant guy. We work on coordination. We got a coordination statute passed in Arizona that requires local governments to coordinate if a citizen petitions them to do so. It's the only state with a bill like that. And he decided he was going to work on the Constitutional Convention for the balanced budget. And I had a real problem with that. And I said, Nick, what I'm afraid of is that you can't control it. That if a convention is called, the people can change the nature of it. Because the people are the base power of that Article 5. And we're outnumbered. We're outnumbered in activists. And if the people who are these environmental radicals get control of that constitutional convention, we're going to see amendments come out of there that we never would have wanted. And he's convinced that it can be controlled, and I'm not. That's the only reason I'm not with him on that. Because I think that the people can control it, and I think the wrong people will be there at the right time. A lot of them, they make their lives this. They make their lives doing bad things to the rest of us. And they will be there. They'll be there to take control. That's my fear. I think anytime, frankly, my position, and it may be wrong, but it goes clear back to my college days, I think anytime the choice is between the legislators being able to do something, the Congress being able to do it, or the people were meant to be the prime movers. One little thing about the people and the people at ground level. How many people know here where the first battle of the Revolution was fought? The first battle of the Revolution. So anybody? Okay.
Long Island, New York, wasn't it?
It was close.
No, not
It was in Massachusetts. There was a group of farmers out there that got hit by what was the last of the acts? The last of the English acts that were the Intolerable Acts. I think that was the one. They got hit by it, and so they weren't going to pay the tariff to the tariff collector. They armed themselves with sticks and rocks, and they went against the tariff collector. And the redcoats had found out about it. And the colonel led a group of redcoats out to put down this insurrection. And when he got there, the people charged them with sticks and rocks. They didn't have guns. He knew it would be a bloodbath, and he forced his men to retreat into Boston. So the people in those days, the people were the ones that brought the revolution. And they did it, and I learned that just last year. So there's hope for all of you. You keep learning, you keep going. I thought Lexington and Concord was the first, but it wasn't. It was the first where shots were fired. Okay. Okay.
I think Scalia's death is rather fishy.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about that he had natural causes? Because it seemed the feds took too long to come to where he was lying, and there was a pillow above his head. I'm just wondering about it.
Okay, you have to tell me again. What is it?
Scalia's death, I think it's rather fishy. You think it was natural causes or not?
Oh, I see. No, I don't. But I'm not going to say any more right now. But no, I don't. No, I don't. Well, I just wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of politics right now. And that's a joke because I am every day. At any rate, I want to thank you for having me tonight. It's a real pleasure always to speak to a Tea Party, and please go home and read that note for contributions. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.